another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. Training camps underway across the National Football League. Our position evaluations set to continue. Dalvin Cook in the news, players restructuring, and the regular season right around the corner. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, and we are here for it. The we is yours truly, Wobby, and of course, my partner and co-host, Gyles. We're here, and we're excited to talk it through. Let's bring Gyles in right now. How's it going, pal?
Hey, how we doing? I am just so excited for football to be back up and running again.
Yeah.
It's a long off season, my goodness, but I'm glad that football is on the horizon here. We're started, we're rolling. I'm going to see if maybe I can make it out to training camp on Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for the pigskin to start getting thrown around again.
Yeah, me too. And our sort of position by position evaluation got us through the dog days of pre-training camp summer, right? Got us through June and July, and we got a couple of more to get to. But now, as I was prepping for this episode, I don't think we're going to get to a bunch of newsy things. We're going to talk wide receivers and evaluate every wide receiver room in the NFC North to see where the Vikings stack up, which we've done with so many other positions in the last couple of months. We're going to do that. That's the meat and potatoes of the episode. But we do have one or two other things I want to get to at the end to talk about. And as we move forward from here and wrap up those position evals, Gyles, we're going to have more of those newsy things to talk about. We're going to have storylines emerging from training camp in the preseason. We're going to start doing the numbers game with the roster. Hey, is it going to be 5 receivers or 6? Is it going to be 3 running backs or 4? CJ Ham going to make it or not? We're going to talk about all those things. And then before you know it, there'll be preseason games, and then we'll be ready to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and how are you going to do against the Eagles in week 2, and are you going to overlook Tampa or not? And I mean, this is what we live for all year, man. And yeah. So do our listeners, and it's here and it's exciting.
I could not agree more. And I think training camp is always an additionally exciting time because you see some players that you maybe overlooked before and they start to thrive. So when it comes to the actual Tampa Bay Buccaneers game, there might be additional people on the field that people might not expect.
Yeah, exactly. So lots to get to, lots to talk about. And much of that we'll do in future episodes. Right now, though, we're going to focus on the NFC North and the wide receiver rooms across the division. So we'll break each room down. We'll go team by team, alphabetical. So we'll start with Chicago. We'll end with the Vikings, and then we'll see where they all stack. We will summarize. We'll not only get into the top 4 players in each room, we'll summarize each room. But as a whole, Gyles, the wide receiver group in the NFC North as a whole, what were your thoughts on it? Because I like sort of looking at it from that way before we get going. And some of these positions we've said, gosh, there's some pretty good players in this division, in this position. And then there have been some other position groups where we're like, geez, NFC North's pretty thin. I don't think that the NFC North wide receivers are, amazing. I don't think we're going to sit here and just tell you how awesome it is. But by and large, it's a pretty good collection, I think, of receivers. I think the NFC North, has some talent at this position. As you went through each team and evaluated each room, what was your takeaway, the collective talent level at this position in the division?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think they're the number 1 division in football, but with that being said, anytime you have a player like Chase Claypool as wide receiver 3, for a specific team, I think you're doing all right. I mean, obviously you have Justin Jefferson. I think it's no spoiler to say that I think he's the best wide receiver in football. Call me a homer, but I think most people agree with that take. You have the Vikings, Lions, Packers, Bears, and all of them have at least a dude, if not multiple dudes in their room. So I think, definitely a solid group to stack up against when it comes to the secondaries in the NFC North. I think they're definitely going to put a little bit of a pressure on.
Yeah, I think so too. So let's get to it. Let's start talking wide receivers in the NFC North at an individual level. We'll start with the Bears, and the way this goes is I'll set the tone with the first 4 players that I talk about, and then Gyles will react to that, and then he'll do the same exercise with his 4 players. Sometimes we align on who they all are at positions, and sometimes we don't, and that's kind of what's fun about it. So we looked at the Chicago Bears, Gyles, and my wide receiver 1 for them is a new player for the Bears, someone they traded for this offseason, and it's DJ Moore, who graded out pretty well last year. But I think, Gyles, DJ Moore is a guy who was probably an impressive chess piece that has been hidden behind subpar quarterback play in Carolina since Cam Newton left. So I think there's an underrated element here to DJ Moore. So his PFF grade is pretty good, but I think his PFF grade, had he been playing with a better quarterback, would have been even better. Now, is Justin Fields representative of a better quarterback than what he's had in Carolina? I would say yes, it appears so, especially if he takes the next step. And if he doesn't take the next step, then I think it's just kind of more of the same for DJ Moore. So we'll see what happens there. But very productive player who can line up anywhere in the offense. I think they can even use him as a running back like the Niners do with Deebo Samuel from time to time.
I like that.
An absolute player here and a handful for defenses to deal with. So on a scale of 0 to 15, which is how we're grading wide receiver ones in this exercise, I came away with a 12 for DJ Moore, a very good grade. Next, wide receiver 2 for the Chicago Bears. I agree with you that Claypool is wide receiver 3, so I have Darnell Mooney as the WR2 in Chicago. Again, a pretty solid grade last year from a PFF standpoint. Had 40 catches on 58 targets, just a couple of touchdowns. But I think that Mooney is a great example, Gyles, of a player who is pretty dang good in his own right. But when you bring DJ Moore in and you push Mooney down, Mooney was like an okay WR1, but he's an awesome WR2. So, you have really enhanced Darnell Mooney by bringing in DJ Moore. I don't look at it like, oh, wow, you're out in DJ Moore. That's really sort of, a thumbs down on Mooney. It's like, no, that actually, you've really helped Darnell Mooney. I gave Mooney a 7, and on a scale of 0 to 10, which is how we're grading WR2s. So a very solid grade for a WR2. Darnell Mooney gets a 7. WR3, Chase Claypool, we already mentioned him. The Bears acquired him in a trade as well a couple of years ago from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know what happened to this guy, Gyles. I thought he was really a good player for the Steelers, and when the Bears got him, I'm like, wow, there's a player the North's going to have to deal with, and it just hasn't really clicked in Chicago. But now, full year under his belt, maybe Fields takes that next step. Remember, Claypool's an absolute beast at 6'4", 238. So a big drop-off since his best days in Pittsburgh. Mysterious what happened to him. But now that he's in a really good wide receiver room and he might have a quarterback taking the next step, I think that there is still upside for Chase Claypool. The WR3s were grading on a scale from 0 to 10, just like the WR2s, and I gave Claypool a 6. And we go to the WR4 on a scale of 0 to 5 for the WR4s. It's Equiminius St. Brown, whose brother is Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit. Equiminius is a player who, I think the raw talent and ability is there. He's got a good frame, good size, 6'5", 214. But whereas Mooney gets elevated when Moore comes in, the fact that Moore comes in, so Mooney goes down to a wide receiver 2, and you got Claypool there, I think St. Brown loses some opportunity and some reps. So it's really incumbent on him to keep his nose to the grindstone and keep trying to develop. If he can do that, I think this kid's got a lot of potential.
Yeah.
And if one of those top 3 guys gets hurt, I think St. Brown steps in, and the Bears can be optimistic about that proposition of St. Brown coming in and perhaps filling the void if Moore, Mooney, or Claypool get hurt. So I think St. Brown's in a good spot here at WR4. On a scale of 0 to 5, I gave him a 4, which is a very high grade for your WR4. So you add it all up. DJ Moore at 12, Mooney 7, Claypool 6, Brown 4, you get to 29 on a scale that goes up to 40. So a very good room here for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like you're cheating off my sheet here because we have very similar opinions about the Chicago Bears. Honestly, going into this offseason, did not have high hopes for the Chicago Bears as a whole. I've said it before, I'll say it again, not in love with some of the things and the moves that the Bears have made. But with that being said, as we've gone position group by position group, I've become more high on the Bears than I think I maybe would have just giving an emotional stance. But looking at this logically, they've done a decent amount to improve their rooms, including, but not limited to, the wide receiver group. So obviously, starting with DJ Moore, pretty phenomenal player from the Cardinals. I think obviously did tremendous things. He was paired up with a lot of different weapons over there, but now he's with the men in Chicago there. I do give him a 12 out of 15. I do think he is a definitely an above average player. But with that being said, I think some people consider him to be like a top 5 player. I don't necessarily consider that. I view him as someone that's quite versatile. He will definitely fill the wide receiver 1 role, but I give him a 12 out of 15 with the opportunity that if he can take a step forward with a more mobile quarterback, with maybe a little bit of an better offensive line and other wide receiver threats here as well, I think there's a chance that maybe he takes a step forward, but I did give him a 12 out of 15. When I look down into the wide receiver 2 position for Darnell Mooney, this guy, honestly, I think in some scarce teams, I think he could be a potentially a wide receiver 1 given the right scenario. But here, I think he's definitely a wide receiver 2. I think he has some opportunities to improve in the run game, but I'd give him a 7 out of 10, considering the wide receiver 2 route. I'm definitely excited with what he's doing here. Now that he's going to be a clear number 2 versus trying to flirt with a number 1, I think you're going to see his performance improve. So definitely excited to see Mooney there. And like you mentioned, for wide receiver 3, Chase Claypool, as a wide receiver 3, I think he's in a phenomenal position. I think he's definitely fallen down the ranks a little bit when he was his days at the Steelers. But at the end of the day, I did give him a 7 out of 10 here. With an opportunity to go to an 8 or probably an 8, considering he's a wide receiver 3. And then specifically for Equiminius St. Brown, like you mentioned, the brother for Amon-Ra, who was one of the best in the business. I did give him a 4 out of 5, considering his performance from 2022. So all that to say, the Chicago Bears get a 30 out of 40 from my perspective.
I think the addition of Moore here really amps up this room. As mentioned before, it pushes solid players down a notch, right? So Mooney's now a 2, Claypool's now like anything you get from him is a bonus. And then you have a stud down there at WR4 developing. So really an impressive overhaul in this room for the Chicago Bears. Definitely a part of their team that's an asset, a part of their team that's a strength that they can rely on. And when you have Justin Fields, a young, hopeful franchise quarterback, you are wise to fill his wide receiver room with talented players. The Bears have certainly done that. So impressive room there for the Bears. Good start for the wide receiver rooms in the NFC North. Let's move on to the Detroit Lions, Gyles, a team that is a very trendy, popular pick to win the North or to make the playoffs from the NFC North. And we'll see what happens with that. As we've gone through position by position down the roster, we've sort of been love-hate with the Detroit Lions. You either love their room or you don't like their room at all. So let's see where the wide receiver room falls in that discussion. And we will start with the previously mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown, who was another one of those players that really stood out on Hard Knocks last summer for the Detroit Lions. His dad was interviewed a lot. He's got a brother also in the NFL in the same division, and then Amon-Ra is good in his own right. An absolute stud for the Detroit Lions, a bona fide wide receiver 1 in the NFL, and he resides in the NFC North with the Lions. A really good PFF grade from last year, had over 100 catches on the season with 6 touchdowns. Can really line up anywhere. You don't see him. I don't think you see him a ton in the slot, but he can go in there. But definitely a wide receiver 1, out wide, can stretch the field, not afraid to go across the middle, makes lots of catches in traffic. He's well built in the upper body. He's strong, and I think when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown as your wide receiver 1, you can be forgiven a little bit for not having great players at WR2 and WR3, and that's where really where the Lions are. I think they're weak after Amon-Ra St. Brown, but with Amon-Ra, they are very strong. I gave him a 12, just like I gave DJ Moore a 12 at the WR1 position. The next 2, I think you could flip-flop as the second or third best players. I think Marvin Jones, I'm going with the WR2. I'll put Josh Reynolds as the WR3. I think he'll be in the slot a little bit more. So let's start with Jones on a scale of 0 to 10. I gave Jones a 5. I think he's a guy. I think he's a serviceable, reliable veteran. And we've said this about other players at other positions, Gyles. I think if Marvin Jones is your WR2 like next year or even at the end of the season, I think you're a little disappointed. I think he's, again, just a guy. He's going to lose a step very soon. He's probably already lost a step from his better days. So I gave him a 5. Josh Reynolds, I also am underwhelmed by him. I think he's a kid who looked really good with the Rams and Sean McVay when the Rams were sort of at their peak, appearing in Super Bowls and winning a Super Bowl. And I think he's kind of gone down since then, has made a couple of other stops. Now he's in Detroit. Just a marginal grade last year from a PFF standpoint, marginal production. Did get into the paint 3 times. I think he can get the job done, but again, if he's your WR3 a year from now, I think you've missed on some other prospects I also gave him a 5. And then WR4 for the Lions, I think is very interesting. I went with Denzel Mims. Is that who you went with? Okay.
I had a little bit of adjustment, but he was kind of borderline for my wide receiver 4.
Okay.
I'll go for it.
So that's who I went with the WR4. Now, Mims had a little bit of an acrimonial tenure with the New York Jets, a former second-round pick, and never really caught on, and there was definitely some acrimony there. Finally, the Jets move on from Mims. They have a crowded wide receiver room now in New York. With Rodgers coming into town, they've got Rodgers' guy, Cobb, plus his other guy, Lazard. They signed Mecole Hardman. They have a stud in Garrett Wilson, so Mims was the odd man out. And he's not the odd man out because he doesn't have talent. He's the odd man out because he's just the odd man out. And so they ship him to Detroit. Now, because of how underwhelmed I am with Marvin Jones and Josh Reynolds, I project Mims as being a guy who could rise up to the WR2 level. So I have a very high grade for Mims as a WR4. On a scale of 0 to 5, I gave Mims a 4, which is almost the same grade I gave Jones and Reynolds. They both came in at 5. So I think that this is an underwhelming group, Gyles, and despite Brown being an elite player atop, however, this group can sort of become elevated if Mims emerges as a stud and gets up to WR2, and then you have Jones and Reynolds fighting for reps as the WR3. So to summarize this group from a grade standpoint, Brown gets a 12, Jones and Reynolds each get a 5, and then Mims gets a 4. That comes out to a 26, a notch below the Bears, most certainly, but not an embarrassing group, especially if Mims can emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Lions are kind of an enigma because they're one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. I don't think they're like the Jets where the Denzel Mim crowd came from. But at the end of the day, they have a great roster. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. They have an amazing offensive line, and they have a quarterback that does well when protected. Said obviously has good leanings for the wide receiver group. So obviously starting with Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm a big fan of this guy. I think he's one of the best in the business. I think he's a top 5 receiver in the NFL right now. I really do. I think when you think about every category, not only is he good, I think he's elite. He has amazing hands, at least catching the ball. I think if you had to point out one deficiency in Amon-Ra St. Brown's game, that would be in fumbling. I think he has a little bit of a fumble problem. And when I say a little bit, I even hesitate to say that out loud. But if you're trying to separate them from the best in the business, you get down to little inches and little nitpicks here and there, and that's the only real knock against his game. Because at the end of the day, he's in the 90s category for PFF across the board. This guy is elite. He's a top 5 receiver in pretty much every category. So love this guy. I did give him a 14 out of 15. I think I am really high on Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think he's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings and our secondary. He's a dude. He's someone that I would absolutely love to have on my team, and I hate that he's in our division. Just calling a spade a spade. And we differed a little bit in wide receiver too, and I really hesitated on doing this because of his off-the-field issues. But Jamison Williams, he did get suspended for the first 6 games. There's a chance that goes on longer. I really went back and forth. Do I make him wide receiver 2, or do I just take him off of this exercise altogether? But I did put him in. And considering his performance on the latter half of the season, because he was hurt for the first half of the season last year, he struggled out the gate, but I think he started to pick up his pace towards the end. So I gave him a 6 out of 10. This is partially, an emotional bias, partially data-driven. But at the end of the day, I think he does have some pretty decent upside. But he's also missing half the season, basically. So I did give him a 6 out of 10. There's a chance he could fall below that if he's not able to really pick up his performance that he had in his rookie year. But I do have him as a 6. I think he could go to a 7, maybe an 8 if he's really able to take a step forward outside of his rookie year. But obviously his off-the-field issues are concerning, considering it's literally costing him his availability. So that's wide receiver 2. And then wide receiver 3, Marvin Jones Jr. Completely agree with you. I think he's a guy, I like him a lot better at wide receiver 3 than 2. I will say that, right? Especially when it compares to your breakdown. I did give him a 5 out of 10 because I think he's maybe an average wide receiver 3. I think, he's a serviceable guy. And then, when you compare that to wide receiver 4, I had Josh Reynolds. He's also kind of a guy, I think, once again, I like him at wide receiver 4 than wide receiver 3. When you're thinking about, going 4 wide, don't love him in my 11 personnel, but hey, he can be a guy to help back up. Yep. I gave him a 3 out of 5. So at the end of the day, I think, they're definitely top heavy when it comes to the Detroit Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown is once again one of the best in the business. If you can get Jamison Williams back, I think you have a decent pairing there. You have a decent duo. I mean, they're not like the men in purple, to provide a little spoiler here, but at the end of the day, I like what they're doing. I think they'll be a serviceable team. I think losing TJ Hawkinson will be a big hurt to their team when it comes to points this year. It'll be interesting. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I gave the entire group a 14 out of 15 for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Jamison Williams was a 6. Marvin Jones Jr. was a 5, and Josh Reynolds was a 3. So that all totals out to a score of 28 out of 40.
Yep, you're at 28. I'm at 26. We got there different ways. I did not include Jamison Williams, as you mentioned, Gyles, but as you were talking about him, I think I'm in line with you on that 6, 7, 8 range for him. Certainly a 7, I would start him out. I thought he was dangerous as a vertical threat, and I know
He's
the
fast.
Vikings. Yeah, he is fast, and I know the Vikings were interested in him a year ago. Wound up trading and not getting him, and then the Lions get him. But I don't think the Vikings are disappointed in that. But I think Jamison Williams is a player. And you mentioned Hawkinson in talking about this group, which is appropriate. However, I have a note to get to Hawkinson when we're talking about the Vikings as well. And I do think he is a significant component in the wide receiver discussion for the NFC North with regard to the Lions and Vikings. So we'll get to that later on. Let's move on to the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah.
I had the most difficulty grading this room of the 4.
Yeah, it was real difficult.
Yeah, this was there's just so much unknown here, and before I get into the 4 individuals I chose and grade them, I'll just start with the summary of the room. Because I think it'll lend some context to the way I evaluated the 4 players. There's definitely a vision here, Gyles, with Green Bay. Like, there is a plan that they have with this room. Now, that doesn't mean you or someone has to like the plan, and it doesn't mean that it will work. However, I think there's a rhyme and a reason to what Green Bay's doing. And it comes down to they want the quarterback and the receivers to grow up together. That's what they're trying to do.
Yep.
They didn't go out and get a veteran to come in and guide this group, right? They didn't go get they didn't bring Sammy Watkins back to hey, he's going to be the guy that everyone follows. How great would Adam Thielen have been in that role for the Green Bay Packers, right?
My goodness.
So Green Bay decided to not do that. They intentionally were like, we're not doing that. We're going to, and I heard Brian Gutekunst, their GM, describe that approach as being a progress stopper. He thought that would slow or stop the progress of their young receivers. So this is the lowest graded room for me in this exercise, and it's not close.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it's a bunch of slappies in this room either. I think there's some talented players. We just haven't seen it. So with that as sort of the summary and the context, let's get into the players. We'll start at WR1 with Christian Watson. Actually a pretty good grade last year. Had very similar production to the WR2 that we're going to evaluate here in a minute. But I think it's easy to see that Watson is a little bit more of a reliable player than maybe Romeo Doubs is. Now, Watson ends up with 41 catches and 7 touchdowns, but you have to wonder what could have been had he made plays on some balls thrown his way that he didn't, including very early in week 1 against the Vikings when he got behind Patrick Peterson and had a walk-in touchdown, but the ball slipped right through his fingers. So, and not only do you not know how that game would have gone for Green Bay had Watson made that catch, but considering Watson making that catch could have helped Green Bay win that game, don't you wonder what could have happened for the season for Green Bay if Watson would have made that one catch? I don't mean to be too sensational on that, but you have to wonder. So anyway,
no, it's a big deal.
A lot of talent here. I might be a little high in this grade, but I gave Watson a 10 on a scale of 0 to 15. mostly because of the upside. I think he is a bona fide prospect to be a WR1. I don't think he's quite there yet, but I think he could get there. I think his ceiling is an 11 or a 12, bordering on a 13 if like Jordan loves the guy and they really got something going, but I got to see it before I can grade it that way, and I ended up with a 10 on Watson. WR2 is Romeo Doubs. Now I mentioned that I thought Watson was like a little bit more reliable, and so he's the WR1 and he gets the higher grade. Doubs, to me, if like everything goes according to plan and you reach your potential, I think Doubs is a stud, but I just don't think that's going to happen. So, modest marginal grade last year from a PFF standpoint, had very similar production to Watson, but got into the end zone fewer times. Played with Rodgers, now he's with Love. Can Love pull from Doubs what Rodgers could have pulled from Doubs? I don't think so. I ended up with a 5 for Doubs. WR3, I went with a rookie, Jaden Reed, rookie second rounder out of Michigan State. Graded pretty well last year for the Spartans. Doesn't have great size. I think he's got some flexibility. I think he'll play in the slot. I'm not going to say he's a guy you can motion and run and put in the backfield and all that yet, but we'll see. I think he's got that potential ability. We'll see what they have with Jaden Reed on a scale of 0 to 10. I gave him a 5, which I think is a fair grade for a second-round wide receiver. And then lastly, I didn't know what the heck to do at WR4. I had no idea. I did some research. I read some blogs. I read some newspaper articles. I ended up going with another rookie here, Dontavian Wicks. And I thought it'd be fun to grade and take a look at someone I had no idea who he was. Rookie fifth rounder out of Virginia. Not much production last season for the Cavaliers. However, great production in 2021, and I'm guessing Green Bay had their eye on him for a couple of years. And I'm guessing that's why they were high on him, and I'm guessing that's because he didn't have great production in 22. Maybe he was hurt. I'm not sure what the deal was, but that's probably why he fell to the 5th round. So Green Bay seems excited about him, Gyles. I haven't seen anything on a scale of 0 to 5. I gave him a 2. So when all is said and done, Watson at 10, Doubs at 5, Reed at 5. That's 20. 2 more for Wicks. The Packers end up at 22.
22. We had very similar postures once again. I think you could make the argument that the Packers have one of the weakest rooms in the entire NFC. Not even the NFC North, but one of the weakest in the NFC across the board. And I think starting with Christian Watson, obviously he's WR1. I put him at a 10. I think for the exact reasons that you mentioned, I think he does have a decent upside if you're able to leverage it. Now, I'm not particularly high on Jordan Love, so I think that will definitely digress when it comes to Christian Watson. I think there's a chance that digresses here from his score this time next year. But I think if he does have a competent person throwing to him, I think that improves. So if I'm completely off on Jordan Love and he shows up and shows out, and then Christian Watson could have it higher, an 11 or a 12 even. I think he does have that type of upside. I think he had some rookie mistakes that if fixed, can definitely show up and ball out there. But at wide receiver 1, have an 11, a 10 out of 15. Then moving on to Romeo Doubs. I'm in a similar posture. I think he's a diet Christian Watson here. I think I did give him a 6 out of 10 here. I think there's some issues in his run game abilities here when a pass blocking standpoint, when necessary. But at the end of the day, I'm not really high on him. I think he has less of an upside with Christian Watson, but when on the field, if they're at their current moment in time, I think he's an average guy. So I did give him a 6 out of 10. I question putting him at a 5 out of 10, but I think based on his performance on the field, I did give him a 6 out of 10. And then moving on to Jaden Reed, obviously, absolute rookie. So a little bit, we'll have to see we'll have to wait and see how he performs in 2023 season. But I did give him a 5 out of 10, partially just because of his performance. So I think if you're able to mimic what he did in 2021, I think that has an upside of a 7 or 8. And he instantly moves up the depth chart into a wide receiver, 2 or a wide receiver 1B. I think, he does have some decent upside if he can get back to 2021 posture. And then for wide receiver 4, I was in the same position. I really went back and forth on who to put in there. I did go with Samori Toure. Not high on this guy either, but he did get some reps last year. I did give him a 2 out of 5 because if I have a wide receiver 4, I think he's the worst in the division when it comes to a wide receiver 4 position. But all that to say, when you add them all up, you get a 10, 6, 5, 2, which brings them to a 23 out of 40, which is not the greatest position to be in, literally and figuratively going into the 2023 season.
Yep, agreed. Pretty similar evaluation there. Don't know who to put in at W4. And need the quarterback to pull more out of the top 3 guys. I mean, that's really where they're at. So the vision is there for Green Bay. Does it come to fruition? We will wait and see. I do not sense that Packers Nation is excited about their room.
No.
So, and hard to be because there's nothing there to look at. It's all projection based. So we'll see what happens.
Yep.
Let's go on to the Minnesota Vikings, who actually I had I said Green Bay was the most difficult room to evaluate, but I don't think the Vikings were much easier. And the reason for that is when all was said and done and I looked at the grades for each team, I was like, it just doesn't feel right with where I have the Vikings.
Okay.
But then I'm like, you know what? Their true WR2 is not a part of this evaluation, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, really, it's Hawkinson. I mean,
it really is.
And so you lose Adam Thielen, and the guys that they're going to ask from a wide receiver standpoint to replace Adam Thielen have a higher ceiling than Thielen has right now. Mm-hmm. But I can't say that they are better than Adam Thielen, and I can't grade them better than I would have graded Adam Thielen because it's just like with the Packers, it's based on a projection. Mm-hmm. And Hawkinson, though, I would have had if Hawkinson was in this exercise as a WR2, I mean, he's like an 8 or a 9 on a scale of 0 to 10. Okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, and if not a 10, I mean, what more do you want out of your WR2 or your TE1? So, so I think the Vikings are at a natural disadvantage in this type of an evaluation because they have a different approach. With their tight end being their true second threat as a pass catcher. So, with all that being said, let's get into specifically the wide receivers for the Minnesota Vikings, and we start with Justin Jefferson, 15. Enough said, right? I mean, he's, to me, 15. You can't get better. You might like Stephon Diggs' style and flavor a little bit more. You might like to lean on Mike Evans having, 1,700 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Whatever. Like, we can split hairs here, but Jefferson's as good as it gets. You might prefer someone else, but no one's better than him. He gets a 15. WR2, I went with KJ Osborne, and I want to give respect to a guy who's been there already. I know Jordan Addison is someone everyone's excited about, but I went with KJ Osborne at WR2. Now, I think he appears to be a really likable kid. Like, everyone likes him. I think he's got a great attitude. People I know at the team all like him. No one says anything bad about him. I think he's a really great option as a WR3. Mm-hmm. But and that's what he is for the Vikings because he's behind Hawkinson, I think, in the pecking order. But in this exercise as a WR2, I think it's a wait and see type of thing. So I think you and I may diverge here a little bit, Gyles, but I gave him a 6. And I don't want to be disrespectful to him here. I think he could end up being much better than that. And as a WR3, I probably would have given him an 8 or a 9. Like, there aren't many WR3s better than him, right? So, I'd rather have KJ Osborne than Chase Claypool. Agreed. He's the Bears WR3. I'd rather have Osborne. So, but they ended up at the same grade. The problem is Claypool's a 3 and Osborne's a 2. So, he gets docked a little bit there. But I do want to qualify that grade as a 6. I think he's better than a 6 just as a WR2. He comes in as a 6. Conversely, with Jordan Addison, Gyles, a really good option as a WR3, right? A first-round pick is your WR3. That's a good position in which to be complete stud at USC, especially in 2021. Like, his highlights and production last year were really good, but he had 17 touchdowns 2 years ago. So 1,500 yards, 100 catches, 17 touchdowns, complete stud at USC, which is saying something because that's big boy football with big boy teammates. USC has no problem recruiting. So Addison standing out for USC, very good. Also played at Pitt, which he had great production at Pitt. But that also that's big boy football at Pitt as well. So I ended up giving Addison a 7 on a scale of 0 to 10 at WR3. And finally at WR4, I think you could go a couple of different ways here. A lot of pub and a lot of positive things for Jalen Nailor so far in the offseason program and so far in training camp. So I went with him at WR4. And I don't want to get too high on him, Gyles, but I actually gave Nailor on a scale of 0 to 5. I didn't go 0 or 1. I gave him a 2. I think he's got a chance. I think he's got raw ability to have a chance. I just don't know if he's going to get the reps and the target share with the other pass catchers. So I think he's an okay option as your 4th guy, and really, as we've mentioned, he's your 5th guy because Hawkinson's your 2nd, so everyone else moves down. So I'm okay with Nailor as a project and a guy that Kevin O'Connell can try and develop. I gave him a 2. So when all is said and done, Jefferson 15, Osborne 6, Addison 7, Nailor 2, you get a 30, and you get the number 1 group in the NFC North.
Hey, there we go. I would say obviously we have a lot of similarities, but a few differences. At the end of the day, I think there is something interesting to be said about your previous comment about TJ Hawkinson and him being wide receiver 2. I think you could also make that accusation around wide receiver 4, because I'm a big advocate that Josh Oliver is going to be integrated into our passing game. When he was passed to for the Ravens offense, he had a phenomenal receiving grade. Like when passed to, he did great. It's just he wasn't targeted because they had Mark Andrews and they didn't pass a lot as an offense. Like they were a very run-oriented team. So I'm really expecting to have Josh Oliver be integrated into the receiving game. With that being said, if we're going to limit this to just wide receivers, obviously it starts with Justin Jefferson, the best in the business. He is the guy. He is the one that is maybe the most valuable player in the entire NFL outside of quarterbacks. I gave him a 15 out of 15. Clear, he is the guy. I don't see him getting any worse. I only see him getting better. Every time he's stepped on the field, season in, season out, he has put more performance on the field. So I'm really excited to see what he puts onto the field this year. So clear best in the business for this division and the entire NFL. So 15 out of 15. I did put wide receiver 2 as Jordan Addison, only because of his high receiving grade. I am very high on him. But with that being said, it is an opinion, so I did give him a 6 out of 10 with the upside that I think he could be up to an 8 or a 9 if he is what I think he is. I mean, that's a big if. Did I get it wrong? I can definitely be a homer in that regard. But he had an amazing performance at USC. I think he has a baller mentality. I mean, there's been a pretty strong comparison between him and Stephon Diggs, both in a literal sense and a figurative sense. He's obviously from Maryland. He's ascribed to the belief that he wants to become the next Stephon Diggs. So if he can get that baller mentality, I know a lot of people think that Stephon Diggs is too flashy and he's a little bit of a prima donna. But when it comes to the baller, I need to win mentality on the field, I'm really excited to see what that could do for the wide receiver 2 position. But I did give him a 6 out of 10 because he is unproven. If he can step on the field and become what I think he is, I think that instantly goes up much higher, which then puts you in the conversation for one of the best wide receiver duos in the league if he realizes that potential. If not, that's a different story. But if you realize the upside, I think you have some really interesting components for the Minnesota Vikings for wide receiver 1 and 2. So then moving on to wide receiver 3, obviously that's KJ Osborne. I really went back and forth on whether he should be 2 or 3. I really love having him as wide receiver 3. I think he's a phenomenal option. I did give him an 8 out of 10 because I think, especially as a wide receiver 3, there's not much better. I think I can't tell his lack of production last year was simply because of lack of targets. I believe it was that. I think there's an opportunity for him to go to a 9 or a 10 if he steps forward and gets more targets this year, depending on our scheme. But I did give him an 8 out of 10 because he's the guy. And then moving on to wide receiver 4, Jalen Nailor. And I think, it's been in the news a lot here recently that he's showing up and showing off at training camp. He's turning a lot of heads. Now, they're not in pads yet, so I think that's something important to note that, if we can continue the performance, that'll be great. But I look at 2022, Jalen Reagor was the wide receiver 4 for the beginning of the season and through most of the season. And then I believe, I can't remember the exact game, but he ran a few wrong routes towards the end of the season and he got benched. Like Reagor was taken out of the game and he was removed from the wide receiver 4 position. And in comes Jalen Nailor. And every time that they ran a unit that required a fourth wide receiver, Jalen Nailor did phenomenally. This guy was elite when passed to. Like he did great in every single category. So when I'm thinking in the context of a wide receiver 4 position, I gave him a 5 out of 5. I'm really high on Jalen Nailor. I think he is, other than, I forget his name, he's like the second fastest guy in the team. They call him Speedy Nailor. This guy, I think, could be a tremendous deep threat for us. And hot take here, depending on if my prediction about Josh Oliver comes true, if they use war wide receivers, in that context, I think Jalen Nailor has the opportunity to supersede KJ Osborne. I really do. When I think about upside, I think he has the upside of being a better player than KJ Osborne. I really do. I'm really excited to see what we can do on the field for him. But at that being said, you have a 15, 6, 8, 5. You have a 34 out of 40 score for a wide receiver room. And that's not even including the tight ends. I think both tight ends we have at the top 2, tight end 1 and 2, are phenomenal. I am really excited about the entire receiving corps for the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, call me a homer, but when you try to look at this from a logical perspective, we have a significant amount of talent, and I'm really excited for it.
Yep. I think we had a few different numbers, and we got there a slightly different way, but we're of the same opinion that this is an impressive group of pass catchers when you throw in the tight ends, and really an impressive group of skill players that the Vikings have. And we haven't done running backs or tight ends yet, but we will in forthcoming episodes. And the Vikings are a team built around its offense, offensive-minded head coach, established veteran franchise quarterback, best wide receiver in the NFL, top 5, top 3 tight end in the NFL, and an offensive line that is better than you think. That's what Gyles and I think about the Vikings offense. And this is a team that needs to score 25, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30 points to win games. And and the defense might get better than it was last year. It can't get worse. And that would be great, but this team's going to be led by its offense, and it will go as far as Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson can take it. So given that's what they've decided to be, the fact that their wide receiver room grades out the way it does is a good sign. It's an impressive room. It's the best room in the division. The Bears are close, but when you throw in the tight ends and combine those groups, it's not close. And I know Cole Kmet just got some big contract that made me, my jaw hit the floor. Like, if that's what Cole Kmet gets, what's Hawkinson going to get? Well, I mean, Hawkinson needs to be paid like a wide receiver almost.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
I mean, that he really does. And he's in line for an extension. That's actually one thing I want to talk about here when we wrap up the wide receiver rooms in the North. But really impressive room for the Vikings, impressive group of pass catchers. They've done a good job of building this up. Several of the pieces were already there when Kwesi and O'Connell arrived. But they've added some pieces, too, that are exciting, including Jordan Addison, and I'm excited to see what he can bring. I don't expect much from him in camp in the preseason. I think it's something you got to see once the games start, and so we'll see what happens. I think O'Connell knows how to evaluate receivers and knows how to use them, so I'm high on Addison as well. I just wanted to give respect to the veteran and put Osborne at WR2. But a fun exercise to go through. We come away pretty impressed with the Vikings and Bears wide receiver rooms. Not so much with the Lions and the Packers, although we do like Amon-Ra St. Brown quite a bit with the Detroit Lions. So fun exercises to do position by position throughout the NFC North to see where the Vikings stack up. With wide receivers, they stack up to be number 1. We have running backs and tight ends yet to do, and we have corners still to do. So Gyles and I will have an off-air production meeting after this recording and figure out what we're going to do next. Maybe we'll get 2 done in the next episode so we can wrap these up before those preseason games and roster cuts get going. Anything else on wide receiver rooms, Gyles, before I transition to something else here?
Yes. Lastly, I think a lot of the listeners might remember from earlier in the offseason, we did an episode kind of entailing what it would require for the Minnesota Vikings to be the best offense in the NFL.
Yes.
Evaluating us if we were able to trade for T. Higgins and use that to be able to propel us forward to have one of the best offenses in the NFL. Yep. I'm a really big advocate that if 3 things happen, I think the Minnesota Vikings can be number 1 in points this upcoming season. Those 3 things. If you get Jordan Addison to realize his upside, and that is all these are if scenarios, so treat that as it may. But if you realize Jordan Addison's upside, if he really becomes who I think he can be, I think he's going to be a phenomenal number 2 position, because I love Adam Thielen, but he lost a step last year in terms of speed, and that really cost us from a wide receiver 2 position. So if you're able to replace Adam Thielen with Jordan Addison, realize what that could be, and actually have a true wide receiver 2, that'll be phenomenal, because then when Justin Jefferson is bracketed, you actually have a true 1B option to pivot to and realize production without having to leverage your tight end. You become much more multidimensional. The second would be your right guard, Ed Ingram. If he takes a step forward and fixes all of his rookie mistakes, and we really clean up our interior pressures, I think that's going to be phenomenal. You got to keep Kirk Cousins protected, give us more time to get the receivers downfield. That's going to be phenomenal. And third, if Josh Oliver is who I think he is, if he's the best blocking tight end in football, and more importantly, can truly be a receiving threat in the pass game, I think we instantly move into the best offense in the league. I really, really do. Last year, and we went over it, we were 4th in touchdowns. We weren't as great from a field goal perspective, but we did really great with scoring touchdowns. And I think we had a lot of deficiencies last year. And I think we're only taking a step forward here. So I think if all 3 of those things become true, I think there's an option for the Vikings to be the number 1 scoring offense in the league.
And that would be exciting, because Vikings fans, especially the new ones, Gyles, and by new ones, I mean since the Moss Carter days. Yeah. They respect and appreciate Vikings history and tradition and the Purple People Eaters and Bud Grant and all that, but new school / medium school Vikings fans, they like offense. They like wide receivers, they like good quarterback play, they like lots of points scored. And that's the flavor, that's the look and feel of this offense. I don't disagree with you that this offense has the potential to be that productive. Yep. And I don't disagree with what needs to happen to get there. I think Ed Ingram doesn't need to be Randall McDaniel, or Steve Hutchinson. Yeah. He just has to not give up 11 sacks. Yep.
And give up the most pressures in the NFL.
Right. I think he gave up 11 sacks last year. It was some ridiculous number like that, Yep. This has the makings of a really explosive offense. It's not automatic. There are some things that need to happen. And Gyles did a good job of sort of laying those out, detailing those. But the bones are there. And, Justin Jefferson obviously is a big part of that. So
100%.
We'll see what happens. Now, moving on to a few of the things I wanted to get to, Gyles, as we wrap up this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. A piece of the structure that was there last year that is not currently there is someone who's going to go visit the New York Jets this weekend. And that is running back Dalvin Cook, who the Vikings released, a month and a half or so ago. Now, on this show, Gyles suggested Dalvin could be back, and literally the next day, Kirk Cousins did the same thing. So I don't think Kirk's listening and a subscriber of the Wobcast 2.0, although he might be. I don't think that's the case. I just think you and Kirk were thinking alike. And I thought that was very interesting. There may or not be a texting
thread. Who knows?
Okay, right, yeah. Okay. Then Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah did not rule it out in his training camp press conference. And I don't know if you heard that, Gyles, but he did not.
I did.
He had the opportunity to rule it out, and he was not suggesting it will happen, but he didn't rule it out. Then I saw that he's going to visit the Jets, and they have Breece Hall, although he's coming off an ACL, so I actually think it's a good fit.
And then Rodgers, is there a win now window?
Yeah, Rodgers just restructured his deal, so they got some cap space. So Dalvin Cook visiting the Jets. On a scale of 0 to 10, Gyles, how likely is Dalvin Cook to be a member of the Jets in 72, 96 hours?
Honestly, because of the restructure for Rodgers, they're clearly making room for somebody. And I think, I'm not inside the room for the conversations regarding Breece Hall, but if they're looking to sign Dalvin Cook, that means they're not confident that Breece Hall is back in the building in an accurate time for the start of season. So I think there's a high chance that comes to play. Now, I was of the opinion for most of the offseason that he'd be ready by week 1, but considering these moves, that tells me that he's not ready, which would make Dalvin Cook a great candidate to go green.
Yep. I heard an interesting discussion on Sirius NFL Radio this morning about what's a better fit for Dalvin, because the two finalists seem to be Miami and the Jets. And I think long term, you would say Dalvin has a better chance to be the RB1 in Miami than he would with the Jets, because the Jets are high on Breece Hall, and rightfully so. However, the injury to Hall that Gyles has just mentioned leads you to believe that Dalvin would be the workhorse with the Jets as well. So I think the Jets are in a better position to win a bunch of games this season. That's my opinion, because I'm high on Rodgers and I'm not high on Tua. And I just think the Jets roster is better overall. But we'll see where he ends up. I think the Bills needed a running back with Nyheim Hines going down, and Dalvin was never really mentioned there. So
no.
It seems to be a Dolphins-Jets thing, and if neither of those, maybe pipe dream it's back to the Vikings. But we'll see what happens with Dalvin and the Jets over the weekend. Okay, a few other players to get to here. The list I have, and you tell me where you want to go first. I have something to talk about with regard to Danielle Hunter, TJ Hawkinson, Justin Jefferson, and Brian O'Neill. Where do you want to start?
Let's start from the back. Let's start Brian O'Neill, Mr. Big Boy.
I don't like what I'm reading. Like, he's not I know he's coming off an injury. We all know that, whatever. But I wish he was, I don't know. It has one of those, like one of the lines I read, I can't remember who wrote it. If I could remember, I'd give him credit for it, but I can't remember, so I'm not going to guess. But the line was, and the team is hopeful that he'll be ready for September, whatever the date the game is, 9th. Mm-hmm. What's the week 1 game date? I wish I knew it off the top of my head. I don't. Whatever it is.
September something.
September. He should be back September, whatever it is. I'm like, really? Like, like, he should be back. It should be like he should be back for the 3rd preseason game or 2nd preseason game when all the starters are going to play it. That would make me feel okay.
Yep.
Am I overthinking this? Like, I didn't like that. Like, that feels to me like it's a lingering, they don't really know when he's going to be back type of thing.
So I totally get that perspective. I didn't really think about it that way. That maybe gives me a little bit moment of pause. But the fact that he wasn't put on the PUP list to start training camp really gave me some excitement. The fact that, like, there's not a definite, he's out, like, there's no way this is coming back. Because obviously there's 2 trains of thought here. Like, will he be back by week 1? And will he be able to play the entirety of this season, or at least the majority of the season? And I think the latter is far more the priority for me, although I would love it if he can play every single game, because he's one of the best tackles in the NFL. Top 10 for both left and right tackle, in my opinion. And PFF would back me up there. So at the end of the day, I'm not super concerned, because it was only, a minor tear. It wasn't a full break or, a full rip in that regard. So I am excited that maybe he could come back. With that being said, it wasn't super widely reported, but we just signed Bobby Evans, tackle from the Rams. And I thought we were, relatively set when it came to offensive tackle. When you think about Vidarian Lowe, when you think about Oli Udoh, I was kind of surprised with that move, so I don't know if that is a leading indicator that, hey, maybe Brian O'Neill is worse than we thought, or if that's just simply, hey, let's bring in another body. There's no such thing as too much competition, but kind of an interesting move to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it is, and it's not an injury to an insignificant, part of his body. Like, he needs your
base.
Yeah, he needs his base. So we'll see. I think he's a tough guy. I think he's a good guy. I think he's a great player. So I'm not pessimistic on him playing. I didn't expect that it would be a sweat to get him to week 1. I didn't expect that. So that's where we're at on O'Neill. All right, let's work our way up from the bottom. Jefferson was second to last. So actually, Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Hunter are kind of the same thing. Those are the 3 players that the Vikings need to extend. Jefferson is that, like, from what I'm hearing, when I listen to him talk and I read what he says, I don't think it needs to get done real soon. I think he's good. Now, maybe he's being a good guy out in public and his agent is, like, banging the drum behind the scenes. I'm not sure. But I think the relationship is so good, the production is really high, and there's no disputing where he is in the pantheon of wide receivers. Like, he's the best. So whenever we do this deal, he needs to be getting the most money of anyone at the position. So maybe that's why there's no, like, tug of war and acrimony here, and maybe that's why he'll be the 3rd of Hunter, Hawkinson, and Jefferson to get it. Maybe that's why he'll be the 3rd. I'm not sure. I'm not anticipating anything soon, but I'm not worried about his future in purple. How do you feel about it?
So, assuming injury remains silent here, I think
Right.
that should always be the case for all these conversations. Assuming lack of injury, I actually low-key think he's being smart here because I work in financial services. I do equipment finance, and we do a lot of negotiation. And when you think about negotiation, you obviously want to be in a power position in a lot of perspectives. And at the end of the day, next year, there's a rumor that the salary cap is going to skyrocket. And when you're negotiating with a team, you're also negotiating with someone that has a limited number of dollars that they can give you. And you're asking for a percentage, right? And I think when that pie gets larger, you have a better negotiating position to ask for more, because then you're saying, well, hey, you have more to give, so you should give more to me. And if that goes up next year, he's actually in a much better negotiation position if he begins those talks next offseason, because he can get way more dollars, especially assuming that they will sign him to a long-term contract. I'm not going to say it's going to be a Patrick Mahomes size deal, but like, once again, assuming that there's no injury here, I think it's a good idea to lock him up for a long time, and he is a smart player to wait another offseason to see that cap go up.
Interesting. All right. A player who did not wait another offseason to get an extension was Chicago Bears tight end Cole Kmet. 4 years, $50 million. I mean, I think he's a good player. Like, whatever. But when I saw that, I was like, geez, what is Hawkinson going to get?
Yeah, I completely agree. It honestly scares me a little bit considering how many players that we're going to have to pay over the next 2 to 3 seasons. I mean, next offseason, Christian Darrisaw is going to be up for an extension. Like, we have a lot of premier talent. Honestly, all of them mostly on offense. At the end of the day, there's a lot of people to pay, and TJ Hawkinson is going to get the bag.
Danielle Hunter shows up for camp without a contract. That surprised me. I thought he would be a holdout.
You know him better than I do because you've actually spent time with him, but I think he seems like a guy that is somewhat logical. He's low-key, not a flashy guy by any stretch of the imagination, doesn't really engage with the media very much. I think it was the penalties for not showing up that he really kind of shifted pace for, because it's $50,000 a day in fees when you hold out. And I think he was just a guy that says, you know what, if I spend 20 days holding out, that's going to be $1 million. Is that really worth the negotiation here? So I think he's more in the hold-in category, as a lot of people have been talking about. But I don't know. I guess you may be hearing different rumors if we're still trying to move him to a different team, or if we're trying to keep him in a purple uniform this year. I'm
not hearing that. I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just not hearing it. I kind of think they want him. I think the Vikings want him there. And maybe they've reached a point in the negotiations where Daniil and his representation feel good enough about showing up, because they're like, you know what, we're this far. I think we're almost there. But I was just surprised. I looked at Daniil as probably a guy who wouldn't be at camp, and they'd get a deal done around the preseason games, and he'd be ready for week 1. But he's in camp, and I don't know how much he's participating. That doesn't totally matter to me, because I know he's kind of learning a new position and a new scheme, but him just being in the building, I think is a really good sign for the Vikings. So, but look, they were, they won a bunch of games last year, all is hunky and dory, and they're feeling good, right? So, when that's the tenor in your building, things like this happen, and they had to make some hard choices, with Kendrick, Thielen, and Cook, and but they also made some positive choices by paying some people and keeping some people. And Danielle Hunter is one of those examples of a positive choice that they made to keep and eventually pay. And if they can find the right spot for him on their defense, he can be a productive player. And really, I think they need him, because I've been pretty vocal on this show. Like, I don't like their pass rushing situation at all. When they lost Za'Darius, I think that hurts. So they definitely need Danielle. But we'll continue to watch those reports out of training camp and talk about them here on the Wobcast 2.0, and we'll continue our position-by-position look at the NFC North to see where the Vikings roster ranks relative to their division foes. As we carry along here through the rosters, we've done a ton of positions, but we got a few left. I think we'll combine corners and safeties, and we'll do secondary maybe, and then we got running backs and tight ends to do. So we got a few episodes worth of these evaluations to get to. Plus, there'll be a ton of other awesome, fun, exciting news to talk about. Gyles, I'm excited to watch Hard Knocks this year and Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, you read my mind. I'm really excited to see how that mixture comes into play, because Aaron Rodgers is a unique personality, that's for sure, and exciting to see him in another tone of green.
Yep. All right. Any other notes from your notebook before we sign off?
No, let's go chase a championship here.
That's
Really
right.
exciting about the wide receiver room.
Yep, I am too. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Wobcast 2.0. We'll be back next week with another one as we continue our position-by-position look at the NFC North, and we talk about other news and notes across the National Football League and the Minnesota Vikings, who are just launching training camp at TCO Performance Center. To listen to previous episodes and future episodes of the Wobcast 2.0, you can find us wherever you find all your other favorite podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. So if you're listening but you'd like to watch, you can go find us on YouTube as well. On behalf of my co-host Gyles, this is Wobby signing off for now. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. Until then, Skol Vikings.